Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
If you've ever spent any time driving or, hiking through the beautiful farmland of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, you've probably crossed this quiet, flat stretch of land. It's a path that just winds perfectly through woods and fields and over creeks.
Right. Today, it's known as the Enola Low Grade Rail Trail. It's a fantastic spot for a weekend hike or a bike ride.
Exactly. But if you stop for a second on that trail and you really look at the sheer rock walls that line the path, or you stand under one of those monumental stone arches that hold the whole thing 60 feet in the air,
you realize it instantly. This was never just a path.
Never.
This was the Pennsylvania Railroad's Ackland and Susquehanna branch, the ANS. And in its day, it was the brutally engineered freight superhighway for the entire East Coast.
Okay, let's really unpack this. We are not talking about some simple detour or a little logging spur here. This was one of the most ambitious, most expensive, and really tragically, one of the deadliest engineering projects of its time.
It completely reshaped the Lancaster County landscape, and it did it in just 3 incredibly intense years, from 1903 to 1906.
So our mission in this deep dive is to take this stack of sources you provided, all the articles, historical accounts, the old schematics, and just trace the history of this railway.
We really need to understand the why behind it, that staggering original goal. And then we have to confront the incredibly high cost, not just in dollars, but in human life.
And then follow its legacy, right? From this roaring steam engine corridor all the way to the quiet, modern recreational trail you can walk today.
And the thing that immediately grabs you, the learner, is just the sheer scale of the financial gamble the Pennsylvania Railroad took.
It's jaw-dropping. This single project, covering roughly 50 miles, cost $19.5 million in the early 1900s.
And that number, it's hard to even wrap your head around what that means a century later. But our sources, they let us put that into a modern budget.
And the result is staggering.
It's the equivalent of over $500 million today, specifically $548,000. That level of investment, just for this one section of the line, it tells you everything.
Yeah, it tells you the PRR saw this route not as an option, but as the absolute essential future of their entire freight network.
But then you have the tragedy that runs right alongside that ambition, the human cost.
That high price tag wasn't just measured in capital and equipment. Our sources are very clear on this. The project claimed over 200 lives during its 3-year high-speed construction.
And that's the sobering foundation of this whole story. The sources really act as a map for us, showing how the PRR tried to buy operational perfection and how that ambition permanently and often violently scarred the southern Lancaster landscape.
It's a story of engineering genius, absolutely.
That's right.
But it's balanced against this incredible, almost unbelievable human sacrifice. So let's start at the very beginning. What was the driving force? Why on earth did the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was already the dominant rail company in the region, under President Alexander J. Cassett, commit to such an improbable, expensive project across this rugged terrain? They already had 2 lines in the area.
Right. And they were known for confidence, but this seems like something else.
It does. It seems like a massive leap of faith unless the need was truly transformative.
Well, the motivation wasn't about faith. It was all about market dominance and, more than anything, efficiency. Cassett had this vision. He didn't just want to compete. He wanted to create a network that was mathematically, physically superior to all his rivals.
He wanted to build what the sources call a nearly perfect freight road.
A nearly perfect road. And the problem he was trying to solve was acute. It was the massive congestion on their main line, the one running from Philadelphia to Harrisburg.
Right, that was their backbone, but it was a mess.
A complete logistical nightmare. It was a 4-track system, which sounds like a lot, but it had to handle everything. High-speed passenger trains, local freight, and this heavy, slow through freight.
And crucially, it was just hampered by these significant grades, these hills, especially near towns like Gap, Mountville, and Elizabethtown.
And those steep grades, they created this massive cascading inefficiency. That's where you get the notorious helper engines.
Ah, the helpers. Explain that, because it's key to the whole story.
So when you have a grade that's too steep, say 1.5% or 2%, A single locomotive just doesn't have the power to pull a long, heavy freight train up the incline.
So they had to bring in reinforcements.
Exactly. They constantly required these helper engines, extra locomotives that were assigned just to push or pull the trains over those difficult sections.
But adding a helper isn't just a matter of adding another engine, is it? It's a whole logistical nightmare.
It's a total bottleneck. Think about it. First, you have to stop the train. You have to take the time to couple the helper engine. That requires an extra crew. It burns extra fuel.
And then when it gets to the top of the hill,
It has to be uncoupled and reversed, which often ties up a siding or even an entire track for 15, 20 minutes or more. This just slows down the entire network, sends crew costs and fuel consumption through the roof, and it makes any kind of reliable scheduling basically impossible.
and their other line, the Columbia Port Deposit along the Susquehanna, that couldn't pick up the slack.
No, it was also congested, and it was too curvy. It just wasn't built for high-speed, heavy freight.
So the PRR needed a dedicated superhighway, a path that would eliminate the need for these helpers entirely, freeing up that main line for the faster, more profitable passenger traffic.
And that's where this quest for geometric perfection began. The engineering mandate for the ANS was incredibly strict, and it's what set the stage for the enormous earth moving that was required.
So what was the first and most important of those design criteria?
The first, the absolute non-negotiable goal, was no slope steeper than 1%.
1%. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means that for every 100 feet you travel forward, horizontally, you only rise 1 foot vertically. It's a very, very gentle slope, and that minimal grade dramatically reduces the power, the tractive effort required to pull a train.
So one engine could do the work of many.
Our sources suggest a single locomotive could haul 4 times the load on a 1% grade than it could on a 2% grade. That eliminates the need for helpers entirely.
So that 1% number, that was the holy grail of freight efficiency. It meant massive long-term cost savings, which is how they justified the massive upfront construction cost. Now, what about the second rule? The curvature.
The second rule was just as strict, and it was all about maintaining speed and reducing wear and tear. No curve sharper than 2 degrees.
I mean, it's very, very shallow curves.
Incredibly shallow. It allows trains to maintain much higher speeds without the whole train slowing down. A sharp curve not only slows traffic, it increases the wear on the rails, on the wheel flanges, the couplers.
Yeah.
It leads to higher maintenance costs and a much greater risk of derailment.
So if you combine a minimal grade with minimal curvature, you get maximum efficiency. You get a superhighway for heavy through freight traffic.
And that's what the ANS was. It was designed specifically to bypass that whole logistical mess of the Eastern Seaboard and the old main line. It linked the rail yard in Morrisville, near Trenton, all the way to Enola and Harrisburg.
And this strategic bypass also solved some smaller but still really annoying choke points that plagued the existing network.
Yes, like the situation in Lancaster City. That's a perfect example of the problem with the old line.
What was happening there?
The PRR had 4 tracks running into Lancaster City, which is great, but the crucial bridge over the Conestoga River only had 2 tracks.
A built-in bottleneck.
A total bottleneck. The ANS route was designed to swing far south of the city, eliminating all of those choke points. It provided a smooth, fluid path for freight, which freed up the main line for passenger and local use, which, still needed to stop in the cities.
So they had this mandate for perfection. But the terrain in southern Lancaster County is, well, it's anything but perfect for a straight low-grade track.
Yeah.
It's rugged, it's rocky, it's cut by these deep gorges.
Oh, the difficulty of the terrain, it really can't be overstated. We're talking about leveling relatively inaccessible land, especially the incredibly steep banks of the Susquehanna River out near Manor Township.
Right. I mean, that area was so challenging that even the great engineering feats of the 19th century, the canals, they had to go around it.
Exactly. The geography was completely unforgiving.
And yet the PRR decided they wouldn't just navigate the terrain, they would rebuild it.
They absolutely intended to dominate it. The PRR was rarely short on confidence, and they had the capital, they had the steam-powered technology and the industrial might to just force their will on the landscape. They were going to cut a perfect corridor straight through, and that absolute commitment to geometry is what led directly to the staggering financial and human costs we're about to get into.
When you impose such uncompromising requirements on nature, nature tends to push back. And often it pushes back violently.
And that commitment to the 1% grade, it transformed the ambition of the engineers, people like Chief Engineer William H. Brown, into this monumental, dangerous reality. And it was a reality executed on the backs of thousands and thousands of laborers.
Right, and this is where the narrative turns just starkly tragic. The construction kicks off in 1903, and the directive from the very top was speed. Get it done, and get it done fast.
They were on a strict 3-year timeline, which meant safety was consistently and consciously minimized in favor of expediency. The sources are absolutely clear on this. Safety was an afterthought.
And that decision, that single decision, directly resulted in the casualty count.
The labor force was immense.
Yeah.
It was transient, and it was subjected to just brutal conditions. Along the bluffs of the Susquehanna alone, the contractors deployed something like 1,000 men and 150 horses, and there were hundreds more spread across the eastern sections of the line near Quarryville.
And our sources really highlight the massive reliance on immigrant labor for this incredibly dangerous work.
Yes, the demand for manpower was immediate, and it was constant. Many of these workers were immigrants, sometimes taken directly off the boats in eastern ports like Philadelphia or New York, and just transported straight to the Lancaster job sites.
Often with little or no experience in this kind of heavy, explosive construction.
Exactly. They came from Italy, Turkey, Syria, and other southeastern European countries. These were the hands that performed the most dangerous, the most back-breaking labor.
It is interesting, though, to note the division of labor, the expertise of the stoneworkers. That was highly sought after, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The massive stonework required for the bridges and the culverts, these were structures designed to last for centuries, that was often entrusted to skilled Italian masons. They brought generations of tradition and expertise to the job. But even their specialized work was happening right alongside the constant danger of excavation and blasting.
And the main tool, the tool required to achieve that perfect geometry in this rocky, unforgiving terrain, was dynamite.
Dynamite was the engine of this whole revolution. Expedient construction would have been impossible without it. Just try to picture the scene. You have these dangerous, massive blasts going off constantly to create cuts in canyons up to 90 feet deep in solid rock.
And in those critical river sections where they were cutting into sheer cliffs, it was even more dangerous.
Incredibly so. Sticks of dynamite were often hoisted up the rock face by hand before being detonated. This process was just repeated layer by layer until the track bed reached that desired, mathematically perfect elevation.
So you're talking about a continuous, deafening, and just incredibly volatile work environment for 3 solid years. The scale of the excavation is phenomenal.
The numbers are what you need to grasp the scale. The constant dynamiting and the digging that followed, it generated an unbelievable 22 million cubic yards of earth and rock.
22 million. How do we even picture that?
To give you a mental image, if you loaded that into modern dump trucks, it would require over 1.3 million trips. The earth moving was continuous, often running around the clock.
And that material, it didn't just disappear.
No, it was immediately repurposed. That rock and earth was used as massive fill. It was used to erase low areas, hollows, even sections of the river shoreline. It permanently changed the topography. The resulting fill created these massive berms and embankments, effectively creating an artificial plateau right across the countryside.
But that relentless pressure to move that volume, coupled with the constant handling of high explosives, that's what led to the horrific casualty rate.
The danger was just baked into the process. Over 200 lives were lost in just 3 years, mostly due to premature detonations, mishandling of explosives, and, flying debris from unexpected blasts. The newspapers of the day, they didn't document this as a single event. It was a weekly toll.
And the sources quote these horrifying headlines that really humanize the statistics. They paint this picture of relentless tragedy. Headlines like, "Blown into atoms, his awful fate."
And 4 men torn to shreds at Highville. These were appearing regularly in the local papers, just one construction-related obituary after another.
The trauma really peaked, though, with the dynamite factory explosion near Colemanville. This catastrophic event happened on June 9th, 1906. It was just 7 weeks before the formal dedication of the completed line.
A terrifying punctuation mark on the cost of the project.
Tell us about the Colemanville tragedy, because the details about the victims are particularly heartbreaking.
The accident claimed 11 lives right there at the factory site, and what just jumps out at you is the extreme youth of the victims. 8 of them were between the ages of 16 and 25.
So young.
Just kids, really. And the explosion was so powerful, the decimation was so extreme, that our sources state that mostly just unidentified fragments were collected afterward. This kind of instantaneous, violent death brought modern industrial horror to a previously quiet, rural community.
And the consequence of that horrific destruction is one of the starkest, most shocking facts from the source material. The recovered, fragmented remains of 10 of those victims were interred together in a single casket.
It's a profound, tangible testament to the price that was paid for this engineering feat.
And this tragedy, it really forces us to confront the class and social dimensions of this cost, too.
It does. The historian Fred Abensheim pointed this out very clearly. He said, if you were a WASP, you got your name mentioned when you died. When others died, they were just numbers. And that suggests that the over 200 lives that were lost, many of them these transient immigrant laborers, their deaths were often minimized or just overlooked entirely, which makes the sacrifice all the more profound. The A&S was truly a path built with a tremendous amount of blood and industrial might. So having established that profound human cost, we have to look at the physical result. To justify that kind of sacrifice, the engineering triumphs had to be equally monumental.
Right. So we turn now to the infrastructure that was necessary to achieve that unwavering, uncompromising 1% grade.
The PRR wasn't interested in working around the geography. They were creating a new, unyielding path straight through it.
Okay, let's talk logistics. The commitment to reshaping the land is most dramatic in these deep cuts. Where do we see this most clearly?
That would be the 7-mile section running westward from Quarryville, specifically in Providence Township. The design demanded these minimal grades, but the terrain was steep, and the PRR would not compromise. Our sources describe how what looked like this gentle compound curve on an engineer's drafting table became a veritable canyon in reality.
So that required contractors who could mobilize immense resources very, very quickly.
Absolutely. The contract for this really arduous section was given to the McManus Construction Company of Philadelphia. They were known for handling the nation's toughest railroad projects, and they faced an astronomical challenge in Providence Township alone.
And that challenge is quantified by the sheer volume of material they had to move.
McManus removed an estimated 1.3 million cubic yards of rock and earth, and that's just in this short 7-mile section. They executed 7 cuts, some of them reaching up to 90 feet deep.
90 feet?
To put that in perspective, we mentioned it would take over 81,000 full dump trucks. Just imagine the logistics of keeping that continuous stream of rock and dirt moving.
It's almost impossible to picture. So how did McManus manage that logistical hell?
It required brutal, advanced construction methods for the era. First, they used these compressed air drills to sink pilot holes deep into the rock face for the dynamite charges. And these drills, they were often powered by centralized steam plants far away, piping the compressed air all across the site.
And then after the blast?
After the blast, these brutish steam shovels, massive, loud, coal-fired machines, would come in and remove the debris in layers. Then a crew of around 300 men would follow, clearing and grading the path. And they were constantly laying and removing temporary rail spurs just to haul the construction materials and the spoil away.
And that spoil, the excavated material, it wasn't just dumped somewhere. It was used to create the required grade elsewhere, right?
Correct. The rock and earth removed from those deep cuts formed the massive berms and embankments that they needed to raise the track bed through the low areas.
The most famous example is the massive fill that now separates the north and south tunnels for Route 272. That's all excavated material from these cuts.
Exactly. The A&S route was essentially this continuous balancing act of cut and fill. And on top of that, the infrastructure required 12 new road bridges just to cross existing roads and dozens of culverts to span the streams. It just sliced right through existing farms and properties as it went.
Now let's shift from the dirt and rock to the lifeblood of the steam era: water. The line itself is the main spectacle, but there was this completely vital, often forgotten infrastructure running right parallel to it: the water system.
This is a detail that just defines the era. A steam locomotive requires a staggering amount of water. By volume, it consumed 8 times as much water as it did coal.
So stopping every few miles to replenish would just waste time and fuel.
And that would defeat the whole purpose. So the PRR, recognizing that efficiency was their primary goal, built an immense and modern water system right alongside the ANS.
And the consumption rate was astronomical.
It was. From its inception, the combined ANS and mainline system consumed over 2 million gallons of water every single day.
2 million gallons.
A day. So to secure this colossal supply, the PRR effectively created its own utility. They formed the Octorara Water Company in 1903 by just consolidating 7 smaller municipal companies, and the PRR became its sole massive customer to guarantee their supply.
And this leads us to one of the most mechanically fascinating innovations they used to sustain that speed. The track pans.
Track pans were brilliant, and they were essential for maintaining momentum. These were large rail-level troughs, often 1,800 to 2,000 feet long, located on the tracks in flat sections of the ANS.
And they allowed a moving locomotive to just scoop up water.
At speed. A heavy, moving locomotive could drop a scoop into the trough and hydraulically force water directly into its tender without ever stopping.
Wait, so what happened in the winter? They had coal-fired boilers running year-round just to keep the water from freezing? That's a whole forgotten layer of complexity.
It's a critical layer. Because the ANS was a year-round, 247 freight artery, they had to ensure operation even in the freezing Lancaster winters. So they installed these coal-fired boilers right at the track pan locations to circulate heat and keep the water in the troughs liquid.
So trains could scoop water without any interruption.
Exactly. The system west of Ackland, which served both the main line and the AMS, included 6 track pans in total.
And the design consumption for just those 6 pans was massive, even accounting for the wasted water.
Oh yeah, the estimated daily design consumption for those 6 track pans alone was over 750,000 gallons per day. And as you hinted, even under the best conditions, at least 10% of the water they stooped didn't make it into the tender. It just sprayed all over the track bed.
So they needed additional drainage infrastructure just to manage the overflow.
It was a massive, thirsty, and technologically complex operation from top to bottom.
Okay, moving from water to steel. To maintain that perfect grade, the engineers had to span these enormous chasms, which led to the construction of some unbelievable bridges and viaducts.
The sources detail about 80 culverts and bridges across the 50 miles, and these structures were built with massive stones, some measuring 3 feet by 3 feet by 6 to 8 feet to ensure absolute permanence and strength.
Let's start with the Mardick Forge Bridge over Pequay Creek.
That was a tremendous statement piece. It's a double-track steel trestle, 635 feet long, and it soars nearly 150 feet over Pequay Creek.
150 feet up.
And the PRR deliberately positioned it high enough that it easily cleared an existing trolley line that kind of rambled along the valley floor below. It was a visual declaration. This was a sky road for high-speed freight, entirely separate from the slow local traffic. Its sole purpose was high-efficiency expansion, not local service.
Then, further west, the project encountered its most daunting obstacle, the confluence of the Susquehanna and Conestoga rivers. This required the massive safe harbor trestle.
This was the domain of H.S. Kerbaugh, the contractor responsible for this brutally difficult section. And to get that 1% grade here required months of continuous hazardous blasting of the sheer river cliffs.
They had to pipe compressed air long distances, often up the cliffs from a converted rolling mill below, just to power the drills for the pilot holes.
And the work was just treacherous. Dynamite had to be passed by hand along these precarious rock faces. The sheer quantity of explosives they used is staggering. In just 1 month in 1905, they consumed 225 tons of explosives to carve that shelf into the cliffside.
And the result was this highly unique dual-level structure.
Yes, a 2-line, 2-level steel viaduct. The original CNPD stone bridge had washed out just as the new trestle project began. So the PRR used the opportunity not just to rebuild, but to engineer for the ANS's perfect grade.
So the ANS line ran parallel to and way above the other line.
Approximately 100 feet above the existing CNPD line, carrying the new rails high over the water. The safe harbor trestle itself ended up being over 1,500 feet long.
That's a monumental structure.
Yeah.
And yet, even the first major structure they built, the Shocks Mill Bridge, had this astonishing logistical challenge that cost more than the structure itself.
That was one of the earliest projects, started in late 1902. They achieved a remarkable pace, completing 1 pier per week by May 1903. The final structure was impressive, 27 piers and 28 arches sitting 60 feet above the water.
But the real logistical killer wasn't the bridge over the water. It was the mile-long approach on the Lancaster side.
Exactly. To maintain that perfect 1% grade heading onto the bridge, the tracks on the Lancaster approach had to be raised 36 feet in height over the course of a mile. This required shipping in massive, unprecedented amounts of fill.
So where'd they get it all?
They sourced cinders of waste product from the Vesta Iron Furnace in Marietta and just hauled them continuously. The sources note that the Lancaster approach alone ended up costing over $200,000 more than the actual bridge structure.
The pursuit of the perfect grade was expensive, even in dirt.
And speaking of landscape modification, the engineers didn't just deal with the rivers and the cuts, they reshaped the actual course of the river near Chickies Rock. They created what became known as Kerbaugh's Lake.
That's one of the most visible examples of the PRR's just uncompromising approach to geometry.
The existing shoreline near Chickies Rock had a gentle curve. To eliminate that curve entirely and maintain that 2-degree limit, they brought in colossal amounts of fill and built the straight track directly into the Susquehanna River,
cutting off about a 3/4-mile section of the original shoreline.
And that formed this low-lying swamp between the new and old rail lines, which the locals immediately dubbed Kerbaugh's Lake after the contractor. It stayed there for decades until it was finally filled in after World War II. It just shows their absolute commitment to the tangent, the straight line, regardless of the geographic consequence.
So after 3 years of this brutal, expensive construction, 22 million cubic yards of earth moved, and the tragic loss of over 200 lives, the ANS was finally complete. The big question is, did it deliver on the efficiency promise for which they sacrificed so much?
Oh, it absolutely delivered. The ANS opened with great ceremony. The formal dedication took place at noon on July 27, 1906, in a location that just highlights the monumental achievement, the Deep Cut near Quarryville.
That location, the deepest cut in the entire line, must have felt incredibly symbolic.
And a little ironic.
The irony was thick. Hundreds of people gathered at the very spot where, just a year earlier, dozens of men had been blasting and digging through 90 feet of solid rock. And to inject a little local flavor into this massive national engineering story, the silver spike used to formally open the line was driven by a local character.
George Hensel, a prominent local hardware dealer and famously the founder of the Groundhog Lodge.
Imagine that, the learner. This momentous national engineering feat being formally opened by a local enthusiast known primarily for predicting the weather. It really highlights the local pride that got wrapped up in this huge corporate venture.
It was a moment of national pride, but filtered through this wonderful local eccentricity. And once it was open, the line flourished. For about 50 years, the ANS operated exactly as intended. It was a high-efficiency freight superhighway for fuel and food, and it eased the intolerable burden on the main line.
And the operational statistics during its peak, they really reveal its success.
They do. Peak service happened during the critical pre- and early World War II period, around 1941. At that point, the ANS was carrying an average of 2,220 rail cars in each direction every single day.
Wow. And the operational advantage of that 1% grade was demonstrated by the average train lengths.
They were pulling trains of 89 cars on average. These things stretched between 3,500 and 4,000 feet long. The low grade made hauling these massive consists highly efficient. It proved Cassatt's vision was right.
Now, despite that intense volume, the operational lifestyle of this dedicated through freight line was almost isolated compared to the bustling passenger routes.
That's a really important distinction. Because it was designed solely for through freight moving goods with minimal interruption, it required relatively few staffed facilities. The sources describe the route as almost desolate compared to the main line, which had constant stops in cities and villages.
But for a line moving 4,000-foot trains, communication had to be absolutely state-of-the-art for the time.
It was. The ANS was built after the PRR had transitioned from the slow sequential telegraph system to the much more immediate and versatile telephone system.
So they had pole-mounted telephone boxes located every 1.25 miles along the entire route, accessible to pretty much all employees.
Yes, and the sources note that communication was paramount. The entire operation would grind to a halt without that telephone system. It was the backbone of scheduling and safety.
And there were still specific facilities needed to keep the steam operation moving. And this is where we get into the complex logistics of managing such massive engines. Smith Tower in Mardick Township was critical.
Smith Tower was a brilliantly designed operational hub. It was wedged right between the tracks and a sheer rock face. It provided essential services for the long eastbound steam locomotives that were arriving from the Enola yard on the Susquehanna.
Right, these trains had just enjoyed a relatively flat run, but now they were facing the long, gradual ascent to Mars Hill summit.
So before that ascent, the trains needed maintenance and supply.
They needed two critical things, and they needed them quickly.
First, they needed to clean their fire. They had to dump the massive amounts of coal ash and cinders that had built up in the firebox. That was essential for maintaining a strong, efficient burn. And second, they needed to refill their tenders with hundreds of gallons of water. Smith Tower was equipped with a large water station and an ash dump.
And crucially, the facility had to be designed to handle the logistical ballet of removing and inserting those helper engines we talked about earlier.
Exactly. At its peak, Smith Tower had 6 tracks stretching west of the tower. You had main lines, passing tracks, and sidings long enough to pull an entire 4,000-foot train completely out of the way. This allowed for the smooth and quick introduction of helper engines, track crossovers to reverse those helpers once their job was done, and all the necessary maintenance facilities. It was all designed to ensure the mainline traffic flowed without a single delay.
And we also have to remember the solitary dedication of the safety crew, the watchmen.
Their duty was solitary, it was demanding, and it was utterly vital to the operation. Watchmen were posted along the most problematic, isolated areas, those deep cuts prone to rock slides and the high fills that were subject to washouts.
They staffed these small, stove-heated, single-room watch boxes in 2 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, often in complete isolation.
Their job was to visually inspect the track and ensure it was clear for the next massive freight train that was barreling through. Their tools were primitive, but crucial. A white day lantern, a red night lantern, and red flags. They bore the solitary burden of stopping a multi-thousand-ton train if a track issue developed.
A lonely, intense responsibility ensuring the PRR's investment was safe.
It was. Now, the ANS was conceived for steam, but it quickly became an integral part of the electric aids thanks to another massive construction project happening right on its route.
Right. The shift was catalyzed by the construction of the Safe Harbor hydroelectric dam on the Susquehanna River. The dam construction began in April 1930, and it started producing power in December 1931.
And it was situated just a short distance from the ANS line, right near where they had built that massive safe harbor trestle.
Talk about perfect synergy. The PRR suddenly had access to an inexpensive, massive, and readily accessible power source right on its route.
And they wasted no time capitalizing on it. Just 7 years after the dam was built, in 1938, the ANS was fully electrified. They installed these massive overhead catenary wires and paired poles, and they seamlessly transitioned from steam to electrical locomotion powered directly by Safe Harbor's generation.
This move allowed the PRR to pull even heavier trains with even greater reliability.
And that infrastructure legacy, it continues to this day, long after the heavy freight trains stopped roaring through.
It's a remarkable continuing legacy.
Although the PRR eventually faded, the ANS right-of-way still serves the regional electric grid. Amtrak retains an easement over the old corridor because Safe Harbor Dam supplies crucial electricity to Amtrak's Northeast Corridor passenger service.
Meaning the route created for low-speed freight now powers high-speed passenger rail hundreds of miles away.
Exactly. The high-voltage transmission lines run right along the former ANS tracks. In fact, in 2011, Amtrak upgraded the system significantly, moving the cables from the old catenary supports onto these new, modern monopoles. The corridor remains a crucial, highly engineered link in the nation's electric rail network. So despite the ANS's remarkable run operating as this highly profitable, functionally perfect freight road for over 5 decades, even the most meticulously engineered lines eventually face obsolescence when the transportation economy changes.
Right. The Golden Age really ended shortly after the war. What caused the line's decline?
The primary catalyst was the post-World War II nationwide reduction in rail traffic. Trucking and the highway systems were expanding rapidly. By the 1970s, the ANS began to lose its strategic function as a dedicated alternate route.
An operational decision was made to favor an alternate freight route to Philadelphia, which made the low-grade ANS redundant.
Redundant for the PRR successor companies. Conrail took ownership in 1976, and that was effectively the beginning of the end of its active life.
What did they do?
They quickly downgraded the line. They removed the expensive overhead catenary and rerouted most of the traffic over other, less costly lines they had acquired. The writing was on the wall.
And just 82 years after George Hensel drove that silver spike in the deep cut, the ANS saw its last train run.
On December 19th, 1988.
And shortly after that, Conrail petitioned for formal abandonment, and the tracks came up.
Conrail filed the petition in 1989, and track removal was completed around 1990. And for the next 2 decades, the abandoned right-of-way reverted fiercely to nature.
The line that was so brilliantly engineered to eliminate grade now just disappeared under heavy vegetation, brush, and trees.
The cuts became these shadowed trenches, and the fills became mounds hidden by scrub. It became a forgotten scar across the landscape.
But the land held value, and it eventually entered the rail-to-trail era, which is its current fantastic reincarnation.
And this is where the story pivots right back to the local communities. In July 2008, Norfolk Southern Railway, which had retained the right-of-way, made this incredible decision.
They sold the property to the 7 or 8 townships it passed through, the same communities the PRR had intentionally bypassed a century earlier.
And this sale, it wasn't about making a profit. It was a profound act of legacy.
How much did they charge?
Norfolk Southern charged each township a symbolic, almost poetic $1 for the property.
$1.
$1. And what's more, NS provided substantial funding to aid the transition from railbed to recreational path. They contributed $1.4 million in grants specifically for bridge removal or repair, plus an additional $1.25 million to Manor Township to develop their portion.
So the incredible infrastructure that was built for $548 million in modern dollars and consecrated by the blood of hundreds of laborers was ultimately sold for pocket change to the local citizens it was originally designed to have serving.
That transition from a dedicated, nonstop transit corridor to a local amenity is the most remarkable feature of its legacy. The path that was kept desolate to ensure high speed through freight now forms the Enola Low Grade Trail, open for hiking and biking for nearly 29 miles.
And the trail has seen some amazing recent completion milestones that ensure that entire 29-mile corridor is fully accessible and safe.
The most dramatic recent opening was a safe harbor trestle in June of 2022. That now allows trail users to cross the Conestoga confluence, retracing the path of the original Iron Horses, but doing so on foot or by bike.
And then in October 2022, the Martic Forge trestle, which was rebuilt after a tragic fire in 2018, was fully reopened.
Which means that there is now a continuous 19-mile improved segment between Manor Township and Quarryville. It allows trail users to experience the deep cut, ride over the massive stone arch bridges, and bike over the soaring trestles, experiencing the scale of the original engineering firsthand.
It's a powerful experience. As you walk or ride that trail, you are traveling a path forged by an undaunting engineering vision, brutal construction logistics, and truly backbreaking labor. Every deep cut, every massive stone arch is a monument to that $548 million investment and the over 200 lives that made the ANS a reality. #CamTagOutro. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Enola Low Grade, the Ackland and Susquehanna branch. Let's just synthesize those key metrics one last time. A 3-year construction period, 22 million cubic yards of earth and rock moved, a modern cost equivalent of $548 million, over 200 lives tragically lost, and an 82-year operational lifespan as the freight superhighway.
The ANS created this complex, layered legacy. It began as a perfect, low-grade corridor for steam freight, transitioned seamlessly to electric power for heavy loads, and today its physical right-of-way infrastructure still supports both high-speed information via those critical Amtrak power lines and leisurely, community-focused recreation in the form of the trail.
And this raises a really important question for you, the learner, to consider as you reflect on this massive project. The original purpose of the ANS was explicitly to expand the PRR system, guarantee substantial, sustainable revenue, and critically achieve this by consciously avoiding local development, local stops, and any local interference.
Right, and if you connect that $500 million investment driven by the ruthless confidence of industrial titans to the final transaction, that symbolic $1 sale price, you have this nationally important, monumental engineering feat whose ultimate lasting destiny became local recreation.
Directly serving the citizens and communities it was initially designed to bypass and ignore entirely.
So does an engineering feat's true value lie in its design efficiency, its original profitable purpose? Or does it lie in the unforeseen ways that its resilient infrastructure is eventually repurposed for profound community and recreational benefit?
It's a compelling thought for anyone standing on that quiet, forgotten rail bed today.
It certainly is. The silence of the trail now tells a very, very different story than the roaring of the steam engines it once carried.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the blood, the billions, and the birth of a rail trail.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.